God has always been in the business of doing extraordinary with the ordinary. I tell people this all the time because most of the time what I get in conversations is, Pastor Scott, I want to be a part of something. I want to serve in this way. I want to help make a difference, but I don't do this, this, and this. And I don't feel like I fit with being able to be a leader like this, or to be an influencer like this, or to make a difference like that. That's just not how God works. God only uses the island of misfit toys to do his work, because everyone's imperfect and everyone is uniquely designed. And so you may not have something someone else does by way of personality or gifting, but God has specifically wired you to make an impact through you the way he has made you. And so in essence, we are going to look for the next 6 weeks or so at these little giants. And it happens every time we turn around. We just seem to overlook it. Because we look at giants, we don't want to look at the things that go on behind the scenes, right? It's this phrase we tell leaders all the time. Everybody wants the results of leadership. Nobody wants the work of leadership. It's the same thing that happens every January when everybody comes in, signs up for the gym, New Year's resolution. Everybody wants to be fit, but no one wants to work out because it's painful working out. The results of being fit means you love the way your pants fit. But that takes, you got to run. You got to do some push-ups. You got to do some sit-ups. You have got to maybe say no thank you to Taco Bell 6 times a week. Maybe just scale it back to 2 times a week, right? Like maybe, okay, you've got to make sacrifices to get there. But this happens actually even today, not just in Scripture, which is where we're going to live in tonight, but it happens today all the time even. There's a man, his name is Justin Williams. He's from Huntington Beach, California. And Justin actually lost his cousin due to depression-fueled suicide. And his cousin was, other than that, before his death, was a relatively healthy individual and was actually an organ donor. So when you go and you get your driver's license, it says organ donor on there. He had selected to do that. And in the tragic wake of his death, as a result of him being an organ donor, his organs were donated to people who were on transplant lists, and it actually was used to save the lives of several people. And this inspired Justin, his cousin from Huntington Beach, to start an organization called Limitless 365. And Justin decided, hey, I exercise all the time. This is part of my, quote, ordinary routine. And what I want to do is I want to inspire 100,000 people to become organ donors. And what I'm going to do is create a program that allows everybody to just check in and get fit every day. Here's something to do to get healthy every day. Here's something to do to get active every day. And he's doing that to inspire people to become healthier in their lives so that in the event of their passing, they too could be, quote, limitless by donating that would help someone in need. It's something super simple that you and I may consider. Like some of the things on there are just get up and take a walk for 20 minutes today. It's ordinary things, but he's trying to do that to propel the extraordinary. Jesus talked about it all the time. In fact, if you look at Scripture, Jesus, especially in the Gospels, because obviously that's where he's doing his work, is constantly using ordinary things for extraordinary purposes. You understand exactly what I mean. I mean, the first miracle Jesus performs, he goes to a wedding and he turns water into wine. I mean, water was ubiquitous, and wine at celebrations was a very commonly used beverage. And then the jars that they used were jars that would have been in most people's estates and homes. And he takes this ordinary thing and does something extraordinary with it. He does the same thing, right? If you've heard the stories of Jesus feeding thousands of people on a hillside, he literally just takes some fish and some bread. I mean, things that everybody had. In fact, it was a poor kid's lunch. What he used, it wasn't even like we think like, oh, bread and fish. I mean, it's like somebody drove through Greek chicken and ordered a number 3 and was just like, all right, feed 5,000 people with this, right? It's just one of those, it's so normal. It was such a commonplace thing. And Jesus always did that. In fact, in Matthew 17, he's hanging out with his disciples, and they're up on this mountain, and he's telling them, he's saying, look, don't have such small faith. He was like, even if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you could move the very mountain we're standing on. Well, most of the time people like me say mustard seed, and that just glazes right over us because most of us have never actually seen a mustard seed. You're like, well, I've had mustard, but I've never seen the seed, right? And maybe if you're like me, like I grew up in the South, and so there are more churches than McDonald's in the South, and so there's a lot of I don't know if they don't have as many out here, but when I was coming up, Christian bookstores were very popular. Oh man, that was the hot thing. This was like pre-Amazon days, and so you had to actually go to a bookstore to buy books and other stuff like that. And there are a lot of Christian bookstores that use the name Mustard Seed. I don't know why. There's a very popular Christian bookstore name circa 1995. In fact, cards on the table, my first quote, paying gig as a musician 20 years ago was at a bookstore called the Mustard Seed in Lynchburg, Virginia. I got paid in a fountain beverage. True story. I got a free Pepsi, but it was a large Pepsi, so it was worth it. I felt like I was balling as a musician. I was like, dude, yeah, I'm basically the same thing as Red Hot Chili Peppers right now. Thank you for my Pepsi. But Jesus talks about a mustard seed. The thing about a mustard seed, he's using it as an example on purpose in Matthew's gospel as he's talking to his disciples. He's using it on purpose because he's trying to illustrate for them something they all know is tiny, but God does enormous in light of maybe our tiny. Because a mustard seed is literally about 1 millimeter in diameter. It's tiny. But it was a ubiquitous item in Middle Eastern, especially Indian and Pakistan cuisine. It would be fried, it would kind of like pop and you'd eat it in certain things, or what would eventually come to what you and I understand is it'd be made into a paste and mixed with water or vinegar and create mustard, right? A condiment that is sold about $100 million worth every single year in the United States alone. It's a very normal, very ordinary food. It's a very ordinary item that Jesus specifically uses to say, with this, I can do this. Because God's always in the business of doing extraordinary with our ordinary. And so one of the things that we get so caught up in a world that seems so heavy, in a world that seems so big but also so small, so turbulent, so upside down, so convoluted, so confusing, so frustrating, so hurting, so dark, in a world like that we live in, we feel as though we are not capable of doing the extraordinary that is needed to make an impact in people's lives. Because if we're all being really honest with each other, we kind of see the world and what's happening, and we see maybe people in our lives, and we see people who need Jesus, or maybe we see mountains in our own lives. And our first thought usually is, I don't know how I can do anything about that. Or maybe it's even self-deprecating. Maybe it's, I don't have what it would need to do that. Well, I have these things that I want to accomplish. I just don't think I can. Or I want to grow in my faith with Jesus. Yeah, but I struggle with this, and nobody would really understand. The truth is, throw a rock and somebody probably understands what you're going through because they're probably going through similar things too. And a lot of us, maybe we just look out and we see how broken the world is and we think, God, I don't know how to fix any of this. I don't know what to do. So I don't want to put my head in the sand, but I feel like I'm at the beginning of the Little Giants movie where the team kind of comes together and looks at each other and think, we have no chance of winning, right? We kind of feel like the underdog all the time. But God has always been in the business of doing extraordinary with the ordinary. So the point of this series is for us to highlight from Scripture ways God did this so that it would encourage us and challenge us really to kind of boost us in the direction of this truth. And this is what I want everybody to remember for the next 6 weeks. The smallest step of obedience in God's direction will go further than the greatest intention to move in God's direction. Do you understand what I'm saying? The smallest step of faith will go further than the greatest falls of fear. Because God is in the business of doing a lot with our little. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, we'll have it on the screen. You can pull it up on your phone or your Bible if you brought that with you. And we're going to look at a story that is not a rarely known story. It's not an uncommonly known story, but it's also not a story that gets talked about a lot because it's very simple. And it's not necessarily as exciting to teach on. If I'm just going to pull the curtain back on kind of pastors across the country right now, oftentimes we don't teach on this because it's hard to pull something out of it. Because a lot of times as pastors, so here I'm just going to lay it out for everybody, right? We want to make sure we got some meat in there so that we can impress you with our seminary knowledge and show you how much we know about the Bible, and also provide you with this epic Bible story. This is not that, but this is incredibly practical and helpful for us as we look, because we undervalue the little giants in Scripture. But we're going to look at this today. In verse 17 of Luke chapter 5, this is what Luke says. One day while Jesus was teaching, some Pharisees and teachers of religious law were sitting nearby. Pharisees were basically kind of, the best way to say this is very kind of arrogant and legalistic rulers when it came to kind of the religious faction in that time. And so we kind of know it in modern day American Christian culture as a Pharisee is kind of a negative term, but back then they would have been seen as people to be revered. But Jesus would kind of turn that on its head, and they would kind of posture themselves above others that said, well, my religious knowledge, my consistent religious practices make me at a higher level in society than other people. And of course, as we know, Jesus turned that entire paradigm upside down, because Jesus came not to get but to give, right? And so Jesus had a lot of interactions with men like this who were kind of religious law teachers, and that's kind of how they would roam about, and they butted up against Jesus and his teachings a lot over the several years that he was doing ministry in this area. And it seemed that these men showed up from every village, Galilee and Judea, as well as from Jerusalem. And the Lord's healing power was strongly with Jesus. So what's been going on here, as Luke, who was most considered a medical doctor, spent time with Jesus, wrote a biography about it. It's called Luke. What he had just recorded several chapters before is Jesus performing some of these signs and these wonders and these miracles that we've all heard about, right? That have maybe been flannel graphed for us, or maybe we've seen a VeggieTales version of it. We've seen Jesus doing miracle after miracle. And what was starting to happen is Jesus would perform miracles, and then he'd kind of go off on his own and just spend some time away. It was interesting because I say this to people all the time when they ask me one of the, what's so special about Christianity, right? There's a lot of religions, and in a world that seems to just need a lot of good, can't they all just be equally good? What's so special about Christianity? Why does that have to be so exclusive, right? And the truth is, with Jesus, is he's the only king in human history to come set up a kingdom and then just give it away. And he's also the only one who would do things like this, like turning water into wine, walking on the water, right? Feeding thousands and thousands of people with a number 5 from Long John Silver's, right? Like he would do these things, and instead of just wading into the crowds and being like, yes, worship me, I'm here, give me all the attention, he would oftentimes retreat because he was trying to just constantly display love and humility for mankind. But we know the human condition, right? If something's popular, we cannot get over it. I can remember several years ago, we would drive to the beach, and you would see people literally with their phones out, walking along the beach and everywhere, just like this. Yes. Yes. Yes, yelling. I mean, people like trying to run out in the middle of the street. And I remember driving with our family, and I was like, Robin, what are all these people doing? They're running out in the middle of the street into traffic, and we get to the beach, and I'm asking somebody about it, and I finally just approached somebody with their phone, and I was like, look, I got to ask you, I don't mean to be rude, but why are you guys all running around with your phones out, pointing at stuff? And they said, oh, we're playing this game called Pokemon Go. And I was like, what is that? I don't know what that is. And they explained to me, and I'm not going to explain it to you because it seems like most people in the room know what that is. But that was so popular, people could not help themselves but want to be a part of it. I mean, I remember talking to my brother-in-law where we would they came into town, and he's literally in my backyard searching for Pokemon on his phone. And I was like, what happened to you? We're both grown-ups with children. And I would understand if you're out there in the backyard with your kids, but they're inside. You're just doing it, right? That's kind of the human condition, right? When something's popular, we want to be all about it. And that's essentially what was going on with Jesus. Jesus was doing things no one had ever done, so he had amassed this following. And people are everywhere. So these religious teachers who felt a little bit, quite honestly, threatened by what was going on, they want to start listening to what he's saying so they can question what he's saying. And then there's just crowds after crowds after crowds. I mean, imagine you get word in your city. Somebody rolls into San Diego and goes to a wedding and turns water into wine. And then the next thing you know, they're just chilling at the beach. People are surfing, and they just like, yeah, I don't need a board. I'm just going to kind of walk on the water and just chill out here. I mean, I don't know about you, but social media would be blowing up about this, and everybody would want to find this person and spend time with them. And that's basically what's going on. And so what ends up happening is Jesus is in this house in this city, and he's teaching. And listen to what happens next. It's so interesting that Luke would record this in these next few verses. In verse 18, it says, some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a sleeping mat. They tried to take him inside to Jesus, but they couldn't reach him because of the crowd. So they went up to the roof and took off some tiles. And then they lowered this sick man on his mat down into the crowd right in front of Jesus. And seeing their faith, because we'll come back to that, Jesus said to the man, young man, your sins are forgiven. And what we know is the rest of the story is he was healed and literally took his mat home with him. See, this is nuts, but it's 2 verses in the entire Bible here, and it's in a few other places in the Gospels, but it is very short. But don't let it glaze over you. Think about what was going on. These friends carried this paralyzed man on a sleeping mat. Have you ever seen those kind of challenge shows, or kind of the making of a Marine, or making of an Army Ranger, and they have to do these kind of challenges where one of them has to just lay on a mat and be carried? And it's kind of what we do, like conditioning and team building. You ever had to pick up just something's kind of dead weight? You ever done that? Maybe you played that game with your brother or your sister where they would be sitting on the couch and you would just go and just dead fish them and just lay there, and they're trying to shove you off, and you're just like, oh, I'm fine. Your dead weight feels like twice as heavy as it typically would. My kids do this to each other all the time. I don't know how this game got created. I know I did it with my brother when I was a kid, and I didn't teach it to them. Sometimes it just gets passed along. I don't know. Maybe that's just a sibling thing where you just kind of lay. It's so heavy. This man was paralyzed, which means in order for him to get places, he needed people's help. And so he had heard of the miracle and healing power, this kind of miracle man and this healing power that was this person, Jesus. And so I'm assuming he had to communicate to his friends, I need to get there to see him, but I can't do it without you, because he was paralyzed. So they put him on a sleeping mat and they carry him all the way in to this house. And I don't know if you can picture this, but it's not like they could just shove him in the back of an Uber and just roll up to the house. That's not how that worked. They had to walk everywhere they had to go, which means everywhere they had to go, the roads weren't necessarily paved like you and I are used to. It wasn't like somebody built some planned neighborhood there and there was beautiful sidewalks for them to work. It wasn't like that any of them were walking around in like Nike Freeze. I mean, some of them may have been barefoot for all we know and just carrying this man on a mat, these friends. And when they get there, imagine carrying him the whole way to get to this house saying, all right, man, we'll drop you off and we'll see what happens, because they had to be believing too. They had to be believing too because they're going to put in the work. Your forearms are hurting. Have you ever done that? Have you ever tried to pick up something heavy? Maybe you've helped a friend move. And by the way, you will hit a phase of life where when people ask you to help them move, you just say, pay a moving company. But in this phase of life, you move friends because they'll buy you pizza. And it's a fair trade right now, right? I'm going to tell you right now. For me, at my phase of life, it's not a fair trade. It's not a fair trade anymore. You want me to help you move? I'd like a TV. I'd like something a lot nicer than some pizza, right? And it's usually cold pizza because you get in, maybe you're like me, and you ask them to help you move, and you got pizza there, and they're like, great, can we eat first? And I'm like, no, let's just get it done. Let's just get it done, and you can eat later. And then by the time you're finished, it's like 3 hours later, you're sweating, you've been to 2 cities and back, and you're like, we still got this pizza? Yeah, if my kids didn't eat it all, sure, you can have some, right? It's horrible. It's horrible. They're tired, their forearms are burning, their shoulders hurt, their legs hurt, they're probably sweating. They get there, and what happens? We can't get inside, it's too crowded. Can you imagine that? Imagine the obstacles. So what do they do? What do they do? These friends got so resourceful, they decided, let's go up to the roof. Now, I don't know about you, but it is very difficult, I would assume, to carry a man on a bed up a flight of stairs. Like I've watched folks over years come upstairs and just get winded carrying a backpack. I see this all the time. In my office, there are students that come up to the level in the building where I'm at all the time. And I see students all the time. They'll just run up the stairs. They got nothing but a lunchbox. And they get up to the stairs and they're like, and I'm like, you been skipping PE, kid? I think you've been skipping PE. Like, it's just one flight of stairs. And they're winning. Can you imagine carrying a man who had to weigh at least 150 pounds, carrying him up some stairs? That's remarkable. That amount of faith as a friend is a big, big deal. And I want to give you some understanding here because it's hard to picture that. We're like, okay, so they climbed up on top of a roof. Who does that anymore, right? I mean, if you're like me, you're thinking, when's the last time you climbed up on a roof? I don't know, when you were a teenager and you threw stuff off of it and got in trouble and had to run from the cops. I'm not saying that's from experience. I'm just saying that probably is what may have happened to you. I'm not saying it happened to me. I'm not saying it didn't, but maybe you understand what I'm talking about. It's rare to go up on a roof. Back then, roofs on houses were essentially flat. So like if you go see a house now, it'll kind of be, slanted and whatnot. They were mostly flat. There was slight curvature because if it would rain, they wouldn't want the water to build up. And essentially how they'd build a roof is they would take wood beams and they'd slab it across, kind of like a giant tic-tac-toe board on top of a house. And then, it wasn't like you had these construction foremen like you do now. I mean, they would essentially get groups together and they would take mud and thatch and kind of grass and straw and just make this nasty concoction of kind of hand put together tiles and just shove it in between where these beams were. And it would kind of harden, so to speak, and make a protective layer on the top of the house. So when it rained, it didn't just come right through. Or like if a bird landed on it, a bird just shouldn't come right through. Does that make sense? That's kind of how the roofs would work. So they had to carry this man up to the roof. And you think about the level of forethought that would have been required, because if they're saying, we can't go in the front door, we can't go in the side door, we can't get him in the window, there's too many crowds, it's just overflow, we can't get in, so we got to take him somewhere. So let's lower him through the roof, which meant they knew that they would have to take him up to the roof. Probably sun is beating down on him, put him down on the bed, hop out onto the roof, and literally where it says that they made an opening and lowered the man down, it means that they had to dig through the roof. What I mean is the mud and the thatch and the straw that had kind of dried and hardened, they had to find something, whether it was their hands, their feet, maybe they found a rock or two, and they had to literally dig their way through some of these tiles because they had to make an opening big enough to take this man, also probably having to find rope of some kind. They had to be extremely resourceful to then kind of slide him over. I mean, you can imagine, we read this story and it glazes over us, but we don't understand like the actual things. Like I wanted you to picture it like you're watching a movie and these men are actually doing this. I mean, they are digging through the roof. And you imagine being inside? Jesus is teaching. I've been public speaking for 20 years of my life, and I've had some crazy things happen to me. I've had babies cry. I've had people talk to me in the middle of a message because they came in off the street and maybe they were inhabited by a certain substance and thought that it was just appropriate to have a conversation with me when no one else was. And I've had those types of things. I've had people no joke, I've had people throw money at me before being up here speaking because I made a joke about giving my kids money, and they literally would throw like quarters up there. I've had people, no joke, in the middle of a message come and deliver food to me because it was a dare. Like somebody dare, like I dare you to take him some cake in the middle. I kid you not. I've had crazy things happen to me, but I've never been in the middle of speaking and just been like, what is that? Can you imagine? I mean, we're just sitting here, hey, we're going to talk about Little Giants. And I'm like, what, dude? What's going on? And all of a sudden we all look up and it's like, oh, yeah, it looks like somebody's trying to dig through the ceiling. That doesn't happen. Can you imagine being in the crowd? You're just kind of like, these Jesus meetings are lit. People just breaking through. This is cool. Like that would have been a trip to see that. And they're up there just doing it. Can you imagine? And it's not like it was quick. These tiles, they had to dig through them, and they had to dig through enough. And also, gravity. Did you consider that? You're in a crowded room teaching, all of a sudden, boom. You're like, what was that? You look up, the sky is falling. I mean, can you imagine you start getting hit with stuff? And you're like, are they throwing mud at me? What is happening? So then you got to move. Everybody has to kind of get out of the way because the ceiling is literally coming down. People look at like modern day, like homeowners association people are looking around like they should have fixed their roof. We are going to find them. You got other people, you got neighbors being like, I always said that they didn't take care of their roof. Their roof is garbage. Like it's just somebody that resonated with somebody. I appreciate that. You guys, but you're understanding it. See, you read this and you didn't picture any of this because it's not real. Sometimes the Bible doesn't come alive to us, but it's real. These men are up there. So then they get this opening after who knows how long. Then they got to get him down there. He's paralyzed. I don't mean to sound insensitive, but it's not like he could really position himself advantageously to get through the opening. Do you understand what I'm saying? Which means they had to somebody, rock, paper, scissors, right? You lose. Somebody had to hop out on one of the beams, right? To be like, oh my gosh, if I go down, I'm going down, right? It's like, and you got to carry him here and set the rope, and you're like nudging him and dragging him to kind of get him over there. And at this point, if you're down in the house and you're in the room, you're like, what? And they lower him down. And can you imagine being Jesus? Imagine being Jesus, because it's crazy, right? We forget Jesus is God. And so I wonder if Jesus is just kind of sitting there like, I wonder if he showed up. There are sometimes you move into a space and you know what's going to happen. And so you kind of move into it with a unique amount of confidence. Like if you ever do a big reveal and you know it's coming and you're super excited to make an announcement, you walk into the room and you kind of look at everybody in the room and you're like, you have no idea what's about to happen, but it's going to be awesome. Right, like I can remember being in situations like that with our kids at Christmas, where it's like, you have no idea what presents have been sitting in my closet for 4 months. And even when y'all have driven me crazy and I wanted to take them back and return them and buy myself something, they're still up there because I love you. And they walk in on Christmas morning and you're just like, you have no idea what's going to happen. And as a dad, you're just kind of smiling. I wonder if Jesus was just kind of sitting there walking in and he's like, okay, so here's what I'm going to talk about today. And in his mind, I wonder if he's thinking, y'all have no idea. They're about to drop a person through the roof. Watch what happens next. Yeah, I mean, can you imagine that? Like, it's just insane. And they lower him through, and what does Jesus do? Now, everybody else in the room would have been like, this is nuts. We came to hear you. We didn't come to hear this craziness. I mean, can you imagine being at the Super Bowl? At the Super Bowl, this was when you could go to stuff. Can you imagine being at the Super Bowl and literally somebody just kind of helicoptering in? And not somebody famous, right? Not somebody, it's like, wait, hold on. That paralyzed guy from down the street? Just kind of, hey, just didn't like my seats. Wanted to come on the 30-yard line. Big Tom Brady fan, just wanted to be here. Couldn't get tickets, so figured I'd just post up right here on the field. Everybody would be yelling at this guy. It would be, can you imagine that? And these religious leaders and teachers would have been just enamored, but probably furious as to what was going on because they just wanted to listen so they could question the teachings of Jesus. And Jesus stops, obviously, what he's doing, looks, and what does it say? Seeing their faith, Jesus said to the man, young man, your sins are forgiven. I love that. Do you know why? Friendship is a common thing with uncommon power. Friendship is an ordinary thing with extraordinary value. Some of you understand what I mean, especially in the last year of our lives, as most of us dealt with probably isolation more than we ever have before, that we start to value friendship and community more than we ever have before. But friends are so common. I mean, my goodness gracious, man, the largest social media platform in the world, you become, quote, friends with someone. There are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of friends in the world. There's a TV show called Friends, right? It's such a common thing with uncommon value. Because look at what these friends did. They had to overcome so many obstacles. They had the journey from the mat to get him in. They had to deal with the fact that he couldn't move on his own. It was difficult to maneuver a bed. Have you ever tried to do that? You ever tried to pick up something? Like I said, you go moving, you want to pick up something. There's certain ways you got to get something through, and sometimes things don't bend that you want, and that's why you end up with scratches, or sometimes you just leave it there and just say, we'll buy a new one. Forget it. I'm over it. They had to deal with obstacle after obstacle. They had to go up the stairs trying to carry him up. They had to dig through the roof. They had to figure out, how do we lower him down? And then they had to deal with this fear of being dismissed and being kind of judged. Can you imagine that? You ever put yourself out on the line for a friend? And you were nervous about it because you were nervous how some people may have looked at you? I had this conversation with our daughter the other day. She came home and I was asking her about her day at school. And I said, Hope, how was your day? And she said, well, it was fine, but my friend on the playground got embarrassed because she said she likes a certain show on Disney Plus, but it's kind of for little kids. And I didn't want her to feel bad, so I told her in front of other people, I like that show too, and it doesn't matter what other people think. And she just said she was putting herself out there. She knew, and she's in the 5th grade, which 5th grade kids are brutal. They can be brutal. They're not quite middle school, so they're like top of the food chain when it comes to elementary school kids. Like I remember in elementary school, 5th grade kids were just, man. I mean, they would whoop you on the playground, and it was just like rite of passage, man. I mean, it was like junkyard dogs out there. It was kill or be killed with 5th graders. Hopefully it's a lot safer now for children, which it is. But in the South, it was just eat or be eaten, right, when it came to playground time. And she's 5th grade, right? And so they're kind of top of the food chain. And she said, no. I'll put myself out there for you. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, that's a silly thing, but you guys understand what I mean. When you put yourself out there for a friend, that maybe you vouch for them, or maybe your friend did something that they wish they wouldn't have done. And so people start kind of stepping back from them, right? Because we don't want to be associated with the negativity that they've brought on themselves because of potential bad choices they've made. But maybe you as a friend say, hey, you know what? I'm going to step into the hurt and just be there. Do you understand what I'm saying? See, they had to climb the roof and dig through the tiles. I think the lesson here for us, as God does extraordinary with ordinary, is the reaction that Jesus had when it says he saw their faith. See, Jesus looked at the faith of the friends, not the criticism of the crowd. So for us, maybe that extraordinary that can be done through our lives is when we do the ordinary and simply be that friend to someone who the way we love them brings them closer to Jesus. Because these friends were willing to dig through the dirt to help their friend meet Jesus. I think the question for a lot of us is, are you willing to dig through the dirt to help people meet Jesus? Are you willing to step into the mess so you can help them know the Messiah? Are you willing to wade in where other people won't wade? Are you willing to be a risk taker? Are you willing to toss that out? Hey, why don't you come to church with me? Hey, why don't you come hang out with this group of friends? It's those little things, those little invites that become giants.